And up next, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to introduce you to our next speaker, Mr. Lukas Sokol, Head of Master Planning, Master City, on sharing of topic, Master City's Innovation Ecosystem, Technology as an Enabler to Realizing Sustainable and Human-Centric Urban Development. Let's put our hands together to welcome Lukas on stage. Welcome.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. And I'd like to also thank every one of you who actually are still here in the room sharing all these very exciting initiatives. I'd like to also thank Cyberport, the Hong Kong government, for having me here and sharing all the work that we've been doing at Masdar City in the UAE. So we have this promise that with technology, you can do anything. And surely this morning, I think we've seen a lot of that truly is possible. I think the fundamental question we as a society is, what should we have technology do for us? So in 2006, the Abu Dhabi government launched the Masdar initiative. Now this is important to say, this is 2006. This is at the peak of real estate internationally. But the UAE took a step back and wanted to see, is there perhaps a better way that we can also do this? The focus was on clean technology, innovation and research, and ultimately the implementation of these new societies. For those who may not be as familiar with the UAE, Abu Dhabi, its capital, is about an hour's drive from Dubai. And Masdar City, highlighted here, is situated right next to its airport, providing a great gateway to the world. It's also next to the new governmental capital called Zayed City, as well as many attractions in our neighbors in Yas Island, where we host several exciting events. So this is the vision of Masdar. I've seen from Hefei City some amazing giant cities. We're a little bit more downscaled to that size. We're about 6 square kilometers, about 3.7 million square meters of development of mixed-use community. Essentially half residential with the rest commercial. This gives rise to about 15,000 people who currently live and work here. Ultimately, it will be around 90,000 people. We have about 1,000 companies who are very quickly accelerating and growing with us within the Masdar City Free Zone. We like to consider ourselves also a gateway to the Middle East, very much like Hong Kong perhaps is the gateway to China and Asia. So Masdar City is a pioneering development, looking at the way that we can build better, more sustainable communities and really transforming the way people live, work, play, and learn in a way to provide more nourishing and meaningful lives. We are very proud to host over 400 delegations from around the world annually. But one of the fundamental questions that we always get asked by the esteemed politicians and planners and technologists is, okay, I have an idea as well, but how do I transform that into reality? What is that course for implementation? So we do this through a sustainable ecosystem. Now, you've heard ecosystem mentioned here several times this morning. I think it's absolutely critical because it's essentially a system of systems, right? Which leads to the next word, which is connectivity. All these systems are interconnected, just like people are. So if you're talking about tech, you're talking about the natural environment, you're talking about the human environment. So there's the traditional 3 pillars of sustainability, being environmental, which for us translates into the physical built environment, and is our physical capital, one that we also have to manage. Then there's the social sustainability. We have to ensure that we have good amenities to ensure a high quality of life so we can attract talent to actually fuel our growth and innovation. Of course, there's economic sustainability in the free zone business ecosystem, which brings in financial capital and ensures that we have enough flow to continue with the development, with growth, and ultimately allowing people to live. Now, I've seen this morning many of the politicians speak with high aspirations that I think are right on target. I think it's a pleasure having so many like-minded people here today. But it's because it's really them responding to their people and setting those vision and goals into how to achieve this new model for living. The goals that we've set are energy efficiency. We have a 40% reduction from the ASHRAE standard, which is kind of the US-based standard that we've applied. We enforce that with Masdar energy design guidelines, and then we also monitor that. And I'll show you how we do that in just a second. Water use as well. Water being in the Middle East is a critical resource for us. We have to desalinate most of our water, which means it also leads to energy use. So it's a critical focus for us. And we try to minimize water use of less than 2 square meters a day. And of course, also waste management is critical, looking at that comprehensive life cycle of building and construction. Waste management, we divert a minimum of 70% from the landfill. We usually actually try to target about 90%. And some of this is very simple. It's actually prompted new industries to develop, is crushed concrete used for future road beds as we develop. The hot topic, of course, is embodied carbon. So we have a 20% reduction in the overall construction of steel structured buildings and a 30% reduction in the overall construction for concrete and structured buildings. Now, this is critical. In terms of sustainability, one of the most important things is we're always looking at being efficient, right? But the best is if you actually don't have to even use the material itself. So really, it's deciding when do you need to build, what do you need to build, and then how do you need to build it? Is there perhaps a new way of doing things? So I think we've all been talking about technology. Of course, it's the Digital Economy Summit here. But it's really quite simple. The application of knowledge, the technology is the application of knowledge to the practical aims of human life. So it always comes full circle, right? We're all doing this in order to help ourselves live better lives. So it's a means to an end. It's not the end itself. That's why the question of what we want to do with this technology is so critical. This is one of my favorite diagrams. I lecture at several universities, and this is always what I show students because it kind of transforms the way that they think about it as designers, right? So I said technology is a way that we can transform our environment, right? But we must remember that we have a history of technology, right? We've been using technology for thousands of years. So it's also about not forgetting the technologies that we've learned in the past. Of course, at the peak there, we all love to see photovoltaics, power generation in new ways that's cleaner. But actually, to achieve efficiency, some of the biggest impacts you can have are actually at that bottom, right? These are passive measures. So the width of that pyramid at the bottom is actually showing overall impact. So this is something that we embed in Masdar particularly. Orientation of buildings, making sure you do windows in the right place, making sure that you're working with the environment as opposed to against it can help you a long way down the road. It can really set you up into being much more sustainable. So let me show you a little bit of how we do that. In order to demonstrate and actually measure using several technologies developed by our partners. We use several accreditation methods. Of course, LEED is more or less an international standard from the US, but it's also been translated into Estadama, which is Abu Dhabi's sustainability program. It's based on LEED, but it's tailored for the location, which has a little bit different challenges than you'll find in North America, particularly the water challenge I mentioned before. We're looking at zero energy, of course, and I'll actually show you some buildings that have achieved that. And we're also focusing on well. Has anybody heard of well before? This is an interesting one because, again, it goes back to people. So you can think about it as kind of like sustainability in the indoors, making sure that people are in comfortable environments that don't have chemical off-gassing from, let's say, glues and materials that aren't beneficial, that there's daylight coming through. And this has been shown to actually have people become much more healthy and more productive to their businesses. And the one I don't have on here is actually the Wired score as well, which is directly rating buildings to show how adaptable they are to future technologies. So as I showed in that pyramid, there's passive measures that can be applied. The ones we've applied in Masdar are first solar orientation. So making sure that we use buildings to actually shade one another so we have minimum heat gain on the buildings themselves. Typically, in architecture, you would want that to be an east to west orientation. But that's if you're only doing a building. If you're doing urbanism, it's actually much better to orient it a little bit so that all your pathways remain shaded. And that's actually one of the images there. The other one is, wind flow orientation. So we want to maximize wind flow through the city. It allows for a much more comfortable microclimate and allows people to contribute to walkability. The other one, the large square on the right, actually represents our density. So the light yellow is if we developed in a low density configuration, much like would happen in a traditional context. But what we've done is we've crunched it down to about 1/9 of that. And of course, in Hong Kong here, you've gone much higher than that, so your efficiencies are actually much higher. But we've gone to 1/9, which allows for much more walkability because everything is closer together. It, of course, also reduces significantly the amount of infrastructure that has to be built. But the important thing is, although I was talking about how we work with our infrastructure and buildings, all of this has a fundamental impact on human beings walking within the public realm environments of Masdar City. And so some of those impacts is, this is Abu Dhabi downtown. So this is our CBD on the island. And you can see this is kind of a temperature in the summer. It does get quite hot there, about 37 degrees. Masdar City, the ambient temperature is actually a little bit higher because we're not right on the coast. So we actually have a little bit higher temperature to deal with. So our challenge is also higher. But our radiant temperature, what people actually feel, is about 37. Now we've measured this, and you can see the impact is actually much greater. So many of you have maybe heard of the heat island effect, which is depending on which materials you use. You can see the asphalt here gets quite hot, up to 57 degrees. So you can imagine what walking on asphalt at 57 degrees can do. Meanwhile, with the densities pushing the buildings closer together, actually using shading above, including PVs that can also not only shade the city but generate power, that takes the brunt of the heat. So our PVs, our photovoltaics, still get to about 55 degrees, but they're not within the public realm or the human environment. Instead, they're generating electricity for the buildings below, while our ground is only 33. So it's about let's say up to 10-degree difference. Now, all this is passive. This isn't us channeling cold air into these passages. This is just which way we orient the buildings to block the sun and allow the breezes to come through and make sure we have a shaded and well-ventilated environment. Now, what are some of the technologies that we use to manage planning and development within the city? So we've built our own platform, and is really based on, we used several technologies from expert companies in the BIM, in the BIM and GIS realm, mainly Esri and Autodesk, but combined them and simplified them. So this isn't anything that you wouldn't see anywhere else. This is essentially Masdar City with the land use colors, yellow being residential, with red being kind of commercial and mixed use. The difference is it's very easy to use. So we still have our GIS environment with GIS managers that run and operate very technically complicated apps. And we still have our BIM managers looking at the architectural side who can do scheduling and all kinds of measurement as well. But those are essentially like 2% of the employees, whereas this is targeted at 95% of the employees. So this is doing a little bit of reverse. We took very high-tech, very capable technologies that we still use in-house, but we also scaled them down in a very user-friendly way so they're more accessible to everybody else. Because we really believe it's not necessarily about bringing technology to power, it's about empowering people with technology. Now, the testament to the success of this that I've received is the finance department complained. I said, what's the matter? And they said, why don't we have access to this? And we said, well, we didn't realize, why would you want access to this? It's like, well, it's really important for us because we actually manage a lot of these plots, and we need to see when we have contracts coming up so we can see where vacancies are coming in. And then they started saying all these business cases that we never thought of as planners, but in their finance side, it makes a lot of sense. And the only reason that was possible is because the adoption rate with the simplified version was so high because it was easy for them to use and adapt to their daily tasks. So sometimes it's about simplification of very advanced technologies and actually making them accessible to general employees. Another feature of this is a little bit unique. Our resolution of our aerial is 1 centimeter. Right? So this was done with drones flying around the city, doing digital mapping, essentially building a digital twin. But what you can see is all of a sudden this created complete new user cases for our facilities management team. Because all of a sudden you can actually see manholes. You can actually see these assets without having to spend time going out and making sure and measuring and doing things like that. For our events teams, they can now quickly measure a little area, see if they can hold an event if something fits in there. This also then translates, of course, into a 3D model. Now, this has existed for years, but again, it's the simplification of this. I actually have this application on my phone that was very easily ported from the Esri platform. The difference here is we are able to directly introduce our BIM models as well. So this is a project that's under construction now, and you can see exactly how it's going to fit in there. And over that, we can also overlay all our planning data and information. So again, that land use map you saw at the beginning, again, it's very simple. Those plots extruded, but they're extruded to the actual limited heights for development. So what that means now, instantly, anybody without having to be an expert, needing to go through technical drawings, can understand, oh, you know, something is not following the rule here. What happened? There's a building poking through. All right? It's like, oh, yes, but that's not an occupiable space, so it actually doesn't have to follow that regulation. That's actually one of our passive wind towers, which is a traditional form called a bergil in the Middle East. me show you another example of how we do design in our public realm projects. The photo here is actually just during an opening of one of our recent parks about a month ago. So we looked at Eco Plaza, where we did what we like to call science-based design. We realized that we had some heating challenges there, and the park wasn't as comfortable throughout most of the day as we would like. So we worked with some of our partners within our ecosystem. So these are companies who used our Catalyst, which is one of our platforms, and also Hub 71, which is another incubator within Abu Dhabi. And they actually mapped all of Masdar city for temperatures throughout the day. The important thing is we were able to get temperatures at various times of day. So just flicking through, which allowed us to then figure out exactly which pavers are performing how, the impact of trees, and then actually do a mitigation measure using that information to the design team to create a more comfortable environment. So that's part of the social sustainability. Now I see I'm slowly running out of time. I only have a couple minutes left. But I do want to talk a little bit about architecture because of course that's a big impact. So our target was 40% energy reduction. We've actually achieved 38%, which is in practical use. So the 40% is design, using technology to model the buildings that we're constructing. The 38.4% is actually in practice, which for those who are within the industry is very high. Usually that number is about in the 20s because you can't really predict human behavior that well yet. So we're well above the industry standard there. We're generating almost 40% of clean energy and of course almost 30% water reduction as well. So here's some of our journey. And it has been a journey, it's important to say, because it's not just about being able to design and vision these things, it's about implementing them, which requires industry development, right? Because there were materials that weren't available. The construction companies did not necessarily have the skilled labor in order to build in these new means. So this was our journey. And you can see right around 2017 was our first net zero project, which was a villa, which was critical. But now we're actually delivering much larger building infrastructure. Our first office building was 102% in 23. And we have 2 more projects under construction, an HQ building as well as a co-working building, which is part of our innovation startup. And now I'd like to show you how we actually measure the performance of these buildings through our Smart Center. This is actually live data that's integrated in an IoT system with all the sensors within the building. And it's actually a control center as well because you are able to mechanically operate these. Of course, the next stage for us is to look at applying that to AI so you can even more accurately operate that. So we are a comprehensive ecosystem, starting from startups with our Catalyst platform all the way into quite large companies. You can see some that you would recognize here as well, including the academic sector, which is critical for us. We are a free zone, so anyone who's interested is welcome to have their access into the Middle East through Masdar City, where you can wholly own your company. And actually have access also to several government initiatives to help fund and build your startup as well. Here are some of our partners. And this is how we are addressing with these partners, because it really is an ecosystem. Although we may know some theory about development and planning and architectural design and public realm, There's the private sector who's taking care of a lot of that much better than we could ever. So we have 6 fundamental growth sectors. And here's a couple highlights of an energy cluster from Masdar Energy, which is building about 20 gigawatts of renewable energy internationally. Savi cluster, which is our smart autonomous vehicles industry, which is looking at smart mobilities, which we've done multiple generations of. Green hydrogen. This is one of the first stations in the UAE providing green hydrogen to vehicles. AI and R&D. There's actually 2 large language models that are Arabic-based that came out of Masdar City. And life science and biotech. Again, you may recognize some companies here also based in China. So thank you. Again, I ask, with technology, you can do anything. And really, it's the people like we have in this room. What will you do with technology? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lukas, for sharing with us your experience.